Hey guys, I hope you're all doing all right. I am. The last time I talked to you, I think we were just kind of going into this thing, and now it seems like we're finally starting to come out of it. So I want to just recap or reiterate what I think are the main lessons of all this. And this is going to be pretty similar to what I said in my last video. It's going to be pretty similar to some of the stuff John Mark has said in his videos. But I think it's important to keep hitting the key points and to stay on the same page, to stay on topic with this stuff. So here goes. First of all, we have to protect our borders. Borders are a lot of things, but one thing they can be for us is like the watertight bulkheads on a ship. If one compartment gets flooded, the whole ship doesn't have to go down. If one country gets, hit with something, the whole world doesn't have to. So that's one thing borders can do for us. But like the watertight bulkheads in the ship, they can have a door. People can go back and forth through the bulkhead. Stuff can go back and forth through the doors. But that door needs to be able to close. And in this situation, at least in this country, that door didn't close quick enough. It was several weeks of mounting concern before the doors were finally closed. And the main reason for that delay was all the moral baggage that's been built up around this issue of borders and border controls and immigration restrictions, to where it's evil, it's morally wrong to have borders, to restrict immigration, to control borders. And, it didn't take long for that to evaporate. It took a couple of weeks, but that's too long. And the places that shut it down a lot earlier did a lot better and had a lot less to deal with. So that moral baggage, that's not coming back. Even when things go back to normal, they might try to bring back some of that, but they've already compromised on that. They've already admitted that it's not beyond the pale. So they are in a fundamentally weaker position going forward than they were coming into this. And so we can really make progress on borders. And the second reason why there was such a delay was there were too many people who stood to lose too much by closing the borders. And that brings me into my second point, which is we have to be more self-sufficient. We can still trade. We can still have exchange with other countries, with the rest of the world. But let's take care of the necessities for ourselves. And let's, maybe just trade for the luxuries. We are in a wonderful position in America where we can do that for the most part. We have a huge country, a huge workforce, a huge economy, tons of land, tons of farmland, oil, most of the resources we need. We can be a lot more self-sufficient. So let's do that. And, if we were more self-sufficient, that could be better for everyone, not just for us. If, when China got hit with this thing and had to shut down, we could have been in a position to help by selling them medical supplies instead of having our source of medical supplies disrupted. So this is going to be better for everyone, not just for us. But we have to be more self-sufficient. And we need to end mass immigration. I mean, that's obvious. We knew that before. There's all sorts of reasons. I've gone over some of them in the past. Other people have gone over some of them. But, definitely with stuff like this, and even once we get this situation under control, we don't need to be playing whack-a-mole with this thing because we're bringing in 1 million people a year from who knows where with who knows what. And, there have been immigration restrictions imposed by almost every country on earth as a result of this, including Canada, maybe with the possible exception of Sweden. Right, but the places with less immigration have done best. And the places that imposed immigration restrictions quickest have done best. I mean, that's obvious, right? The less immigration, the less travel, the less transmission, right? If there were no immigration and no travel, there would be no transmission. We probably don't want that. Maybe no immigration for the most part, or almost no immigration. But, there's still valid reasons to travel. But the less of it there is, the less transmission of something like this there's going to be. So, in ending mass immigration, people often refer to, the golden age of mass immigration, Ellis Island. But even Ellis Island could turn people away on medical grounds. Like, that's obvious. That's a no-brainer. And besides that, the unlimited immigration back in those days wasn't really unlimited. It was naturally limited. So it wasn't as easy to get around. The world was a lot bigger. The barriers to immigration were a lot wider, a lot costlier. You had to get on a steamship for a week and sail across the Atlantic. And relatively speaking, it was fairly expensive. Like, it was attainable, at least for Europeans, but it was kind of a big deal. It wasn't just like a thing where you get on a plane and for a few $100 you're across an ocean on another continent the same day. It wasn't like that at all. So there were natural barriers to immigration. And furthermore, we're past the point in our history where we're an empty land that needs to be settled. We're past that point. So the value of immigration, which may have been considerable at one time, is greatly diminished today because we have a whole different set of concerns other than populating and developing an unpopulated and undeveloped continent. The fourth point is we have to do something about capitalism. And we can still have markets, we can still have profit, we can still have private ownership of capital. I'm not saying anything against those per se. Don't get me wrong here. But there's an undue influence over policy and other important matters by the capital owning and mercantile classes. So, for example, we have to be able to tell them no. We have to be able to tell them, you can profit, but not at the expense of the nation or not at the expense of the people. And, a lot of what markets and capitalists and market agents, market actors do is arbitrage. Buying stuff where it's cheap and selling it where it's expensive. And that entails moving it basically from where it's of less value to where it's of more value, and that's fundamentally a value-creating proposition. So there's nothing inherently untoward about that. But if people are trying to undermine or tear down, necessary and helpful things like borders, because those stand in the way or they're an obstacle for them engaging in more arbitrage, then they're not just creating value. They're also destroying something of value. They're also taking value. They're also imposing costs on other people. And that we cannot allow. So we have to be able to tell them no. We have to be able to tell them you may profit, but you may only profit by creating value. You may not profit by destroying value or taking value. And fundamentally, we have to emphasize to these capitalists and to these firms and to everyone else that they own capital at our whim and at our pleasure and our discretion, right? There's no physical way for somebody to maintain control and defend billions of dollars in assets themselves, or even with, let's say a private army. It would be impractical, it would be uneconomical for them. So fundamentally, they own it at our pleasure and at our discretion. And I don't mind if people accumulate vast sums of capital. As long as they do it by providing value and not by destroying value, and as long as they're good at it. I want capital to be in the hands of people who are good at managing it, because it's not, it's a fundamental misunderstanding to say, oh, well, you got this billionaire, so he's got, I don't know, 1 million times or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of times more wealth than I do to consume. No, that's not what it's about. It's about managing capital and allocating capital. And I want that to be done by people who are good at it. So I don't mind that. But they have to understand that they're doing it at our whim and our pleasure and our discretion. And, they have to do it in accordance with our interests, at least not in conflict with them. Otherwise, there's no reason on earth for us to protect that right for them. No reason. It'd be better just to make them protect that right themselves, if it comes down to that. So it doesn't benefit us to protect their right to use capital in ways that are destructive to us, or tear down borders or whatever else, or brain fart. Anyway, I'll move on to the next point. Woke capitalism. This may be something you've heard about. Probably is. Woke capitalism is, where these firms have taken postmodern political correctness and adopted it as virtue signaling, either as part of their advertising or as internal policies or whatever. And it's a growing phenomenon. It's a growing problem. And it's not just the case that this happens because these firms get infiltrated by ideological activists. That's certainly part of it. And it's not just the case that their officers and executives often choose the path of least resistance and cave into it, give into it, just kind of shuffle these people around instead of getting rid of them, whatever. Although that's also part of it. Firms have principal agent problems where the officers and executives of the firm, their incentives, their personal incentives, don't always line up with what's best for the firm. But there's actually a lot of concordance of values and interests between these ideological activists and between these firms and their officers and executives. Because these ideological activists, they want to tear down borders and traditions and families and religions and cultures and identities and all of these things that stand in the way of their global socialist utopia run by ideological activists and intellectuals like them. So that's their program. And these firms, by and large, want to tear down all of the same things for their own reasons, which happen to be creating global markets, creating a undifferentiated pool of interchangeable worker consumer units to produce and purchase their bland, prepackaged, materialistic, mass-produced consumer culture. So they are, to a large extent, on the same page with a lot of this stuff. And they're in it for their own reasons, but the same objectives. So it's not just a case of infiltration and co-option. There's some genuine alliance going on here. This is another case where we have to be able to tell firms no. And finally, there might be sometimes kind of in extreme circumstances where we have to be able to tell them positively, to do something like shut down or, switch production from one thing to another. That'd be more of an extreme thing. That doesn't need to be something that happens all the time. But as far as this shutdown thing goes, I've heard a lot of people talking about property rights, civil rights, inalienable rights, that kind of stuff. That's a legacy mindset, all right? That's part of an experiment that really doesn't have a lot good to show for it. So we need to get past that. It's not a civil rights issue. It's not a property rights issue. It is fundamentally an epidemiological issue. So, when people were first started talking about this thing, it was thought to have a fatality rate of like 2 to 3%. And you're talking millions of lives on the line if that is the case. And so something like a shutdown seems warranted and seems reasonable if that is the case. And, and it's something that's potentially worth enforcing. Like, it's an issue of if your church is open or your business is open or you're going about doing whatever you want, you're potentially endangering others in their lives. So there is a threshold where, we don't allow you to impose risks on others. Obvious case, if you take a revolver, put one in the cylinder, point it at somebody and pull the trigger, right? That's not an acceptable level of risk to impose on somebody. We would all call that assault, basically, whether anything happens or not. Now, what if that revolver had 100 chambers in the cylinder or 1,000 chambers in the cylinder? Well, then it starts to get a little bit more debatable. If it's just imposing a risk, obviously, with no benefit, there doesn't seem to be a case to allow you to do that. But, we do allow you to get in a car and drive around at high speed, and that imposes a risk on people. Now, there's some benefit to that. And so, the more the benefit, generally speaking, and the less the risk, the more worthwhile it is to allow. But as a general rule, you do not have the right to impose risk on people, and certainly not for no benefit. And if there is a benefit, you might have to share it with them. So there is a valid case for restricting people's actions and people's freedoms in this way at this time. So it's fundamentally an epidemiological question. If it's 2 or 3% fatality and millions of lives are on the line, then yeah, a shutdown seems reasonable. Now, we now know it's much less than that. And if it's 0.5%, then then it's much more debatable. And if it's even much less than that, which now seems to be the case, then it's almost certainly not worthwhile to shut down the whole economy, because that has tremendous cost too. Like poverty kills people, isolation kills people, depression kills people, and not being able to get routine medical care or being scared to get elective procedures in a timely fashion, that kills people. So all of that stuff, and I read an article recently that said that the shutdown has saved 250,000 lives in the U.S. Now, you could quibble about that or whatever, but let's just take it as a given. If it saved 250,000 lives, it's probably not worth it. Because, if you look at the original scenario where 2 to 3% fatality, 5 to 10 million lives possibly on the line, the average value of a Western life is something around $5 million. So that's like $20 to $50 trillion potential cost of the loss of life, right? So under those circumstances, that's like a year to 2.5 years worth of GDP. Yeah, so maybe a shutdown is worth it in that situation. But if you're talking about 250,000 lives, that's only 1.25 trillion at $5 million per life. And that's not a totally arbitrary number I'm just pulling out of my ass. You can derive that number in a variety of ways, from how much people are willing to pay for safety related devices and services, how much you have to pay people to accept riskier jobs, to do riskier jobs. You can look at a variety of kind of clues, and most of them converge on an average value of around $5 million for Western life. And so if the shutdown has saved 250,000 people, and that represents a savings of about 1.25 trillion, but we've spent more than double that just on the bailout, not to mention indirect costs of the shutdown, it's not paying for itself. So we have to open back up. But I'll talk more about that later. I kind of got off topic. My next point is we have to plan ahead. This whole situation has really vindicated the prepper mindset, the prepper mentality, and it's really revealed a shocking lack of preparation at every level, from individual to institutional to governmental. So, we all got to do a better job of planning ahead, and I hope you'll do that as an individual. I have been more conscientious about stocking up on certain things and preparing ahead, and I hope to maintain that, and I hope you do as well. There's probably only so much we can expect from firms, from businesses, because they are profit driven. They have to compete with other firms, and the firm that's stockpiling critical supplies is not going to be competitive with the firm that's using just-in-time inventory management, unless it's something that's like mandatory, and we decide that everybody has to do it to a certain extent. But we can certainly do it as individuals. We can have civic organizations and non-governmental organizations that do it, religious organizations, and of course government. And we have to do this better at every level, because something like this will happen every so often, and it's kind of a flash in the pan a little bit this time, not to minimize the people who have been tremendously adversely affected by it, but eventually it's going to happen for real. And it's something that does happen from time to time throughout history. You just have to look back, and there's numerous instances you could point to, and not just plagues, not just pandemics, but there's all sorts of things. We deal with local disasters all the time, and that's one thing, and we're always prepared for that to a certain extent because other locales can pick up the slack and divert supplies to the affected ones. But there are some more global catastrophes that could befall us. Of course, nuclear war is an obvious one, asteroid impact, solar flares or geomagnetic storms. There was a big one back in the 19th century that fried telegraph lines. So if that happened today, it might take down our whole grid. It might take down all our communications. That would be a huge disaster. It'd be chaos. So, there's all sorts of things that could happen and eventually will happen. We don't know what, we don't know when, but, there's a lot more we can do to just be prepared in general. So we have to be prepared. We have to plan ahead. And another point, on a more personal note, just, don't be a conspiracy theorist. I'm sitting over here rolling my eyes at most of the conspiracy theories, and the main reason I'm rolling my eyes at them is, they always posit that somebody's doing something for their own benefit. Whether it's the globalists or Bill Gates or whoever, right, is doing something for their own benefit. And most of these people are not benefiting. Most of these groups are not benefiting. Globalism is taking this on the chin, just like I said in my last video. So, elites and institutions are losing credibility. They're losing power in various ways. They're not benefiting from this. Now, one thing that is obviously true is leftists and liberals, the deep state, however you want to group those people, they're broadly in favor of maintaining the shutdown as long as possible. And this probably has a variety of causes. One thing is, they legitimately have more to fear, more to worry about. They all live crammed together in big blue cities, right? But another thing is, they obviously must know, because it's obvious, that they have the best chances of retaking the initiative and retaking the institutions this November. The longer they can continue the misery, prolong the misery, the better they'll do in November. And so that obviously has to influence their thoughts and their statements and their actions. Right? It doesn't take a conspiracy to explain that. It's obvious to everybody they're going to do better in November if they prolong the misery. So you'd like to think that that wouldn't influence their behavior or their actions in that way, but to an extent that's just how humans are, and them more so than most, because they're totally ruthless and callous. But that doesn't take a conspiracy to explain. That's something like what we would call an emergent conspiracy, or a conspiracy of common interests, where it's obvious to everybody what's in the interests of a particular group of people to do. And so the people who are in that group, they don't have to collude, they don't have to collaborate, they just know what to do. And we do have to open up, as I said, and that's starting to happen. A lot of states are getting that rolling. Hopefully that'll continue. Hopefully that'll expand. Hopefully that'll widen. And if the big blue cities, want to stay closed a little bit longer, that doesn't really bother me that much. But don't be a conspiracy theorist, because, first of all, these conspiracy theories are generally the product of a disordered mind. So they are, just loony and wacky. I got into an argument online the other day with one guy who said Bill Gates was doing all this to try and get us to take the vaccine so we would die. And he linked a couple of videos about stuff Bill Gates had said about vaccines and population control. But he had to totally misconstrue what Bill Gates was saying to support that conclusion. And the more I pointed out the flaws with his extrapolations, the angrier he got, and the more I became an accessory to this whole thing. And that's kind of what it is. There's a reason the stereotype of the conspiracy theorist is the guy with the bulletin board with all the clippings and the red yarn, right? And what do they always say? Connect the dots. Connect the dots. Well, I would submit to you that that's not a particularly good way to go about things, because humans are very good at pattern recognition. And so good, in fact, that humans are able to find patterns where there are none. So you're really likely to lead yourself astray that way. And the better way to approach things is to have a critical approach, where you're subjecting things to criticism, to tests. You're trying to, poke at it and see whether it holds up, whether there are any holes in it. And, you can do that with the official narrative. You can do that with conspiracy theories, and you can do that with whatever. Now, what's left, what survives, is going to tend to be better than, what these people come up with connecting the dots. So you're not going to know as much, but what you do know is going to be a great deal less wrong. So that's how I would recommend approaching these kind of questions. And just look on the bright side. There are a lot of positives in all this, believe it or not. Your mileage may vary, but there are a lot of bright sides. The world is a lot bigger than it was just a few months ago. And that's going to last for years at least. It may last permanently. Airlines are going to shut down. And, when things open back up, there are not going to be as many airlines. It's going to be more costly. There are going to be fewer people traveling. And that may never recover to the, levels of before. Because people may not tolerate being crammed like sardines into planes anymore. They may want more space. They may want more comfort. They may want more safety than they were willing to tolerate before this. So, the world is a lot bigger. There have been some things like the moral baggage around borders has just kind of evaporated. And we know that, everybody admits now that at least in extreme circumstances, there can be a rationale for shutting them down. So that's not going to be something they're ever going to be able to deny in the future, that there is some valid reason for shutting them down, because they've already compromised on that. A lot of students have gone home, and how many of them will stay home? How many of them will homeschool and not go back to school? A lot of people are going to start prepping and not stop. So there's a lot of positives in all this, and there's a lot of opportunities too that you can seize. If you haven't been able to afford to stay home, this is an opportunity to get ahead of the people who have. This is an opportunity to advance in relative terms. If you have had to stay home, maybe it's an opportunity to start a business. And if, they always say buy low, sell high. There's a lot of stuff that's low right now. So if you're in a position to buy and you have the means to buy, then, now's a good time to buy. And so, we got to protect our borders. We got to be more self-sufficient. We have to end mass immigration. We have to do something about capitalism. We got to plan ahead. I urge you not to be a conspiracy theorist and to maintain a critical attitude towards both official narratives and conspiracy theories, and especially towards conspiracy theories, because they tend to be even lower quality. And then, just lastly, look on the bright side and seize any opportunities that you can that arise out of this. Till later.